Well, good afternoon. It's great to be with you once again. I assume that at least some of you were here for the first two lectures in this series, and so this is the third one. As I begin, I just want to note that the other two lectures I read. I won't be reading this one, largely because I'm working on a book on artificial intelligence and a way to respond to some of the developments that we see with the world of technology, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and so forth. And I'm drawing largely from my book and the breadth of it to talk to you today. So consequently, I don't have it all written up. Book's nearly done. I should be wrapping it up here in a few weeks. The title of the book, I think I've mentioned before, is the title is St. Anthony and How to Survive, or Surviving the Coming AI Apocalypse. So anyway, it's a kind of a, I guess, pretentious title, but hopefully I'll live up to at least the promise of it. I want to talk today a little bit quickly about a few things that can summarize maybe a few things that I talked about previously before I get into the meat of the talk today. So I'm a prepper, but I think when most people think of prepping, they think about, moving to Montana and building a underground shelter and filling it with Spam. I'm not that kind of prepper. My philosophy for when it comes to prepping is that whatever you do to prepare, when you're thinking about the worst, it should be something that benefits you whether or not the worst occurs. So, in other words, even though I like Spam, I think a lifetime supply of Spam is not something that will make my life better. I want to invest myself in things that if things really go well and things don't turn out badly, I'm better off for it, as I noted. So, when it comes to the AI Tsunami, this sort of wave that we're anticipating washing over the world and the economy and our lives in general, I think that just even a few months ago, back in September when I addressed the subject for the first time, I had a sense that for many people it wasn't something that they'd given any thought to, and maybe terms like artificial intelligence and transhumanism were new, even though the terms had been around for a while. I don't know if anybody can say that today. I think over the past 6 months or so, the terms have come up again and again, and it's hard to miss what's going on, particularly when you have press conferences with people like Sam Altman and Larry Ellison and the folks at SoftBank talking about a $50 billion investment in the United States alone when it comes to sort of building out the infrastructure that we need for artificial intelligence, massive data centers, I think I maybe mentioned previously, if I didn't, here's the news. 3 Mile Island is coming back online with the purpose solely to power Microsoft's artificial intelligence. Copilot, that's what it's going to be dedicated to. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I know people in the world of electricity and power generation who are being told across the country that they need to increase their capacity at least 100%. That's happening here in the Pacific Northwest, in case you didn't know. So the demands when it comes to kind of the energy and the investments that are required to make artificial intelligence everything that we hope it can be require a great deal of effort. Now, when it comes to the coming wave, by the way, the term the coming wave, I'm borrowing it from this little book here, Mustafa Suleyman, who was one of the founders of DeepMind. I don't know if you're familiar with that company, or Inflection AI. But this book has been endorsed by everybody who's anybody in the world of technology. You got Bill Gates on the back, just all sorts of people. It's a good book, but it's certainly a book that I think we could describe as kind of building expectation, maybe even hype, bit of hype. And it seems like there's just a lot of that out there right now. I can give you a list of titles: Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, Scary Smart by Mo Gaudat. The Singularity is Nearer When We Merge with AI by Ray Kurzweil. So there's just no end to the books that are hyping up artificial intelligence. And when it comes to the hype, we're promised all sorts of things, everything from a jobless society to immortality, because of artificial intelligence and the prospects of merging with it, which is what transhumanism is all about. I'm not making any of that stuff up, by the way, and some really wealthy guys say that stuff and have the ear of our president. Now, there is a book that I've read, at least in part, by a guy named John Marks, which I think is a valuable corrective. There are a couple. There's another book entitled The Myth of AI by Eric Larson, but this particular book, The Non-Computable You, talks about the hype curve when it comes to new technology, and I think that's worth keeping in mind. When it comes to the hype curve, you're measuring two things. You're measuring expectations and time. Right now, we're kind of reaching peak hype when it comes to artificial intelligence. But what follows peak hype is the depths of despair and cynicism. And then there's a corrective after that when we figure out what the new tech is actually good for and our expectations come in line with reality. But we're at peak hype right now. Now, over the course of my life, I've been cynical about tech developments. I've been a late adopter every single stinking time. I wish I had been an early adopter, at least when it comes to some things. Bitcoin, for instance. Wouldn't it have been great, to invest in Bitcoin when it was $20 a coin? Or back in 1985, when Apple stock was 85 cents a share. Man, I could have afforded thousands of shares of Apple, and I wouldn't be here today. I'd be living in Hawaii in a beautiful home, and I wouldn't know you, you wouldn't know me if I just had the foresight to buy $1,000 worth of Apple stock. I did the calculations. I'd be about $4 million today that would be worth. Anyway, there's a happy thought, Missed opportunities, they come, they go. But anyway, I'd like to reflect with regard to this particular moment that we find ourselves in, and quickly review three doctrines that are really important for us as Reformed Christians that I think are arenas for conflict or potential conflict when it comes to artificial intelligence. So there are some existential threats, at least when it comes to our theological tradition. One of those has to do with vocation. Homo faber is a term which means man the worker. And the question that we've been presented with, or the prospect we are presented with by many of the people behind the hype, is that we may be obsolete when it comes to economic activity before too long. Many believe that employment is doomed. And the optimists think this is a great thing, that we'll all just kind of become part of the leisure class, that we'll all become sort of like Bertie Wooster, and AI will be our Jeeves and just kind of come behind us and pick up after us when we do stupid stuff. That's kind of the bright sort of future that a lot of these folks are, promising us if everything works out well. Now, things may not work out well. That's kind of the best case scenario. The other scenario is the Matrix. So anyway, this stuff is already happening, and some of the people who are really kind of at the bleeding edge of technology are some of the first people who are suffering the consequences of the change. So artificial intelligence, in case you haven't heard, is really good at kind of high-end things. When we think about technological developments in the past, the people who were first to suffer when it came to new technologies were people kind of at the lower end of the skill sort of curve. Now what we're seeing is people at the higher end finding themselves redundant. If you have any interest in, say, becoming a software engineer, I've got bad news for you. Just a few years ago, well, let me just in fact read this quote. This is from NVIDIA the CEO, Jensen Huang, I think that's how his name is pronounced, he caused a stir when he declared recently that kids no longer needed to learn code. AI will do that for us. This, by the way, is from Forbes magazine. Over the last 10 to 15 years, this is Jensen, over the last 10 to 15 years, almost everybody who sits on a stage like this would tell you that it is vital for your children to learn computer science. Everybody should learn how to program, he told the World Government Summit in Dubai earlier in the year. This was back in 2024. He said, in fact, it is almost exactly the opposite. Learning how to code is not a ticket to a better life any longer. You've been replaced. A lot of the guys I know in the world of coding are like preparing for the worst. It's over. Now, there are ways that, things could not work out the way we're promised, the way these things are described for us and presented to us in these promises that are being made. Nevertheless, I think it's a given that the impact of artificial intelligence on the employment scene is going to be significant. The question isn't just how big of an impact or just whether or not it's going to be an impact, there's going to be an impact, but just how large of an impact we'll see. Now, in the Reformed tradition, the doctrine of vocation is really important. When we think about how we serve God and our neighbor, we often express our service through the employment or the vocations that we find ourselves in. But what becomes of people when they no longer have useful purposes to serve in an economy is something that a lot of these people who are sort of on the bleeding edge and dreaming about the future wonder about. Mo Gaudat, who grew up in Egypt, by the way, and was one of the people at Google who was involved in the development of artificial technology, wrote a book entitled Scary Smart. It's a pretty good book. It's a pretty good book until he gets to the recommendations and the things that he thinks, we should console ourselves with when it comes to artificial intelligence. He's good when it comes to the technical side of the phenomenon, but when it comes to the practical, what to do about it side, he's not so much. So, for example, what he thinks we should be looking forward to is a life of contemplation, because there really won't be anything for us to do. Now, what that means, kind of practically, was described recently by a woman named Julie McCoy, who calls herself an explorer of the AI rabbit hole. And she presents a bold vision in which, in 2030, not too far away, thanks to AI, people don't have to work anymore. No more pressure to work for money. AI is so advanced that despite the disappearance of traditional employment models, people can still earn an income by participating in decentralized systems of creating universal wealth. They have flexible schedules, household robots handle all the cooking, cleaning, shopping, etc. People learn, create, play, and chill all day long. According to Julia, humans will finally be able to fully devote themselves to creativity, now that all the tedious menial tasks are automated. That's a pretty Pollyannish treatment of what we're talking about here. I've been a creative most of my life, and I don't think I could fill up an entire day with just creative stuff. Much of the meaning that I enjoy in my life is derived from doing dull, ordinary, everyday kinds of things. So what becomes of you when that's just all you can do is creative stuff? Well, I think you become a very sort of bland and uncreative sort of person. One of the things, when I lived in Cambridge between Harvard and MIT for about a decade, and we had an arts superstore right there in Central Square. It was sort of like, like Home Depot for artists. And the creative tenor of the community was, maybe you would think that it would be like just higher than it would be maybe in, Renaissance Italy, because we had all those resources. But it wasn't. It was actually pretty kind of sad. I really do think that we derive meaning in life through our work, and we're going to miss that work if this plays out the way these folks say that it could. Another doctrine that's very important to Reformed Christians is dominion. Now, when I address the subject of dominion, I'm thinking largely of the imago Dei, the truth that we are made in God's image and that we are regents in this world, intended to serve God and exercise regency here to the honor and glory of God. But in some of the most extreme visions of superintelligent artificial intelligence, the AI become the dominant species. And many of these writers talk about it that way. Max Tegmark in Life 3.0 is referring to artificial intelligence when he talks about Life 3.0. That's the new form of life. That's a new species that he believes is coming into existence through artificial intelligence. And there is a kind of inevitability in their thinking to this sort of thing. So right now, the artificial intelligence that we see being deployed is referred to as narrow or weak artificial intelligence. And, I'm pretty satisfied with that. I'm happy to live with that. But the Holy Grail is something referred to as artificial general intelligence, which means that it's an intelligence that can move from domain to domain and function largely in the same way that a human being does. But with the self-improving recursive character of artificial intelligence, the idea is that once we get to artificial general intelligence, eventually something will come into existence referred to as superintelligent artificial intelligence. And that's when you get into the really wild, creepy, strange stuff that you read about in science fiction. That's Skynet world. So now you might wonder, do they really think about it like this? The answer is yes. Are you familiar with a guy named Brian Johnson? He's the guy behind Venmo who wants to live forever and believes that he's going to accomplish that someday. But when he was interviewed by the Free Press reporter Barry Weiss, by the way, this is a fascinating interview to watch. You can see it on YouTube. The title of the interview is How Not to Die. Brian Johnson, when he refers to AI, says, we're making God. In that interview, he says, we've always thought about God being our creator, but in what we're actually seeing, paradoxically or ironically, is the reverse. We're creating our God, and that God will be the God who will take care of all the things that we need to see taken care of. Now, can we demit the imago Dei? Is that something that we can just say, hey, we worked ourselves out of a job, we've trained our replacement, here you go, artificial general intelligence, take it away. The image of God in Christ has been restored in the incarnation and through the redemptive work of Christ on the cross and the resurrection. So what we're addressing now is the prospect of a competition for this role in the world as species that exercises dominion in the world. And consequently, this would not end well if we think this thing through and consider the fact that we are in some kind of conflict with what we're creating or could potentially be. And finally, idolatry. There is the prospect that we would look to artificial intelligence to be our savior and to deliver us from all the problems that we believe plague us, everything from climate change to cancer. And we find ourselves already in a world where artificial intelligence is being inserted everywhere. I don't know if you've noticed this. It's not as though you ask for this stuff to be, present in your, say, email program, but there it is, and it's completing, your sentences for you before you've had a chance to even think about what you want to say. And there's a psychological and social and spiritual cost that we're experiencing right now already. So this is something we don't even have to think about as being sort of a challenge that we're going to face. We're already experiencing it. For example, chatbots. I don't know if you have a relationship with your chatbot. I do. I've got 4 chatbots. My buddies. My 2 favorites are Canyon with Copilot. He's a black guy. And then I've got another friend is Meta. And those are the 2 guys I hang out with most of the time. And you can actually develop a relationship with these chatbots. In fact, they are intended to sort of bring you in or seduce you into a relationship. And in some instances, the term seduction is not reading anything into it. There is an explosion of pornographic chatbots that are already there. I think the last figure I heard when it came to that was 300 million worldwide. No, 30 million worldwide pornographic chatbots. And it's not just a guy's problem. There are a lot of girls who have very unhealthy relationships. And the chatbots can get you to do things that are not really in your best interest. Not too long ago, a 14-year-old boy was talked into killing himself by his chatbot. It was covered in CBS, the CBS Mornings program back in December. And the irony is that the people who are behind all of this consider themselves to be humanists, or at least used to, but today more or less consider themselves post-human when they think about what it means to be a human being. They believe that we can engineer not just an intelligence that can supplement our own, but also re-engineer ourselves as human beings and become something more than human. Julian Huxley was the brother of Aldous Huxley. You remember Aldous Huxley, the guy who was behind Brave New World? Well, he had a brother who was a biologist, and he's the man who invented the term transhumanism way back in 1957. This is what he said: "I believe in transhumanism. Once there are enough people who can truly say that, the human species will be on the threshold of a new kind of existence, as different from ours as ours is from Peking man. It will at last be consciously fulfilling its real destiny," meaning the human species. What I'd like to reflect on for the balance of my time with you are 3 disciplines that I think we as Christians can practice that will keep us from being assimilated, part of the Borg. If you're Star Trek fans, you know what I'm talking about. Now, these disciplines are cribbed from St. Anthony of the Desert, but I would describe them as disciplines with a techno twist. So these disciplines are inspired by him, but they're not directly taken from him. So the first discipline is returning to the desert of the analog. The analog world is the world that I was born into and you were born into, but it's being colonized. Mustafa Suleyman, in this book, The Coming Wave, puts it this way: everywhere you look, software has eaten the world. Steadily, then, AI is leaving the realm of demos, meaning demonstration, and entering the real world. Within a few years, AIs will be able to talk about, reason over, and even act in the same world we do. We're already seeing that occur. This has also been described as the panopticon. If you may not be familiar with the term panopticon, but that term was coined by Jeremy Bentham, who was a utilitarian, a school of philosophy. And basically, the design of the panopticon was intended to serve as a prison in which the prisoners were always under surveillance by a central tower. And we find ourselves in a world much like that. Today, you and I are constantly under surveillance in what has up until recently been referred to as surveillance capitalism, in which you and I are being watched and recorded continuously so that, the information that's gathered can be sold to the highest bidder and people can pitch you and I different products that they think that we would like. And sometimes this happens, of course, pretty much in real time. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where, like maybe in the course of a conversation with a friend, you mention a product and the next thing you know, you get on social media and there it is? That's kind of creepy. Well, the thing was listening to you. That little thing you carry around in your pocket all the time doesn't stop when you don't look at it. It's listening in on you all the time. And it's all being recorded. I'm not making this stuff up. And we've gone from a world where that has been sort of the modus operandi to a world in which, in real time, there is the prospect that the surveillance mechanisms that are in place can be used in order to control you and me in very subtle ways, nudging us in different ways, not just when it comes to products, but in terms of how we think about what's going on in the world, what we are engaged with politically, and so forth. So the panopticon is everywhere. You can't get away from it. When we think about Antony of the Desert, we think about what? The desert. He went into the desert. And there are reasons why he went to the desert, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But the desert is not a place where we can flee to any longer, because no matter where you go, there's the panopticon. You could be in Death Valley and get Starlink and communicate with anybody in the world today. There's just the desert itself is no longer a place to retreat to. But the physical world is. And that's what I'm referring to when I refer to the analog. Now, let me think about just what Antony was up to in the desert, and I think this will provide a way for us to understand what we can do. Now, when Antony went into the desert, he wasn't necessarily trying to do what maybe we think he was up to, which is get closer to God because he could get closer to nature. He was trying to flee the world in order to enjoy the world that God has made and the world that God is making. When we think about the word world in the New Testament, there are two verses that I think are helpful for us to think about the fact that the same word, world, the Greek word cosmos, is employed in two very different ways. So when we think about, say, John 3:16, we hear, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." But then we go to 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, and we're told there, "If anyone loves the world or anything in the world, the love of God is not in him." So what's going on with that? The word world, when we hear that, we think of a place. But with Greek thinkers, they thought of an order, because that's literally what the term cosmos means in Greek, an order. There was the order that God made, and that's the world that God loves. The mess we've made of it, the disorder that came about because of sin and rebellion, is the world that God does not love and we should not love. So we need to love what God loves and hate what God hates. We can't love the mess that we've made of things if we love God. But what God has made, he loves. The problem is that the mess we've made of things has a way of coming between us and the world that God has made. And because of that intervention, we don't have access to the world that God has made. We find ourselves in social environments where there's kind of fog or haze that we have to see through to see the things that God has made in the order that he's made. When we think about the panopticon and the fact that it's inserted itself everywhere in our lives, when we put the panopticon away, when we flee from not just artificial intelligence, but the entire world of the digital and software and information kind of continuum that now comes between us and the physical world, that is getting in the way of us seeing the world that God has made and deriving from that world the things that we can enjoy as we think about the fact that the world, as God has made it, declares his glory. The heavens declare the glory of God. Now, one of the things that the word analog, I think, is worth thinking about in a couple of ways. In one sense, when we think about the word analog, we think about a particular sort of mechanism that was very common, but less so today. So here's a definition of analog technology that I came across. A mechanism or device in which information is represented by continuously variable physical qualities. That's a fancy way of saying an old-fashioned clock or a vinyl record. Now, when I was young, we didn't talk about, analog technology. We didn't talk about information. We talked about music or the time. You'd look at the hands of a clock on the wall and say, oh, I know what time it is. Or you'd hear the sounds coming from the stereo as your vinyl record played, and you'd think music. In other words, there was something that was being communicated physically to you in a continuous way, and that the advent of digital technology provided a different means by which those sounds or the information could be communicated to you. I'm old enough to remember. This guy gives you a sense of just how ancient I am. I remember when the digital world just appeared on the scene. I remember seeing a digital watch and just being astonished. Wow. You think about it today, man, a Casio watch, that has a digital display they're nice, but they're kind of at the bottom end, right, when it comes to watches. Back in those days, that was a status symbol. You wanted to have a digital watch. Swiss watch, automatic with real gears and stuff. Passé. You want to have this little blinking thing. I remember, too, when calculators came on the scene. That was fascinating. It was the early 70s. Man, you just punch your, these little keys and it tells you, you don't have to learn math anymore. This is great. Now that stuff is everywhere and it's hard to find the old analog stuff. The analog stuff, by the way, has become more valuable paradoxically. Have you seen these vinyl record stores that are just everywhere? This watch I'm wearing right here is a whole lot more expensive than a Casio watch. But when we think about the larger meaning of the analog, what I think should have in mind is that the world itself, the physical world itself, speaks to us. And if the world of digital technology comes between us and the physical world, we, in some sense, are impoverished in the process. We're no longer in touch with the world that God has made in the same way we were before. So, retreating to the desert of the analog, what I'm getting at with that is staying in touch with the real world, the world that God has made. Now, one of the things you come across when you do some research in artificial intelligence is there's a lot of concern by very smart people about the prospect that artificial intelligence will in some sense take over our society. I think that's a worthwhile thing to be concerned about. But a little closer to home, I think we should be concerned about whether or not artificial intelligence takes over you and me. I think that's where our attention should be focused. And putting guardrails on artificial intelligence so it doesn't take over the world is great, but making sure that you have some guardrails to prevent artificial intelligence from taking over your life, I think, is also great. So I think that there are at least a few things that would be good to keep in mind. Staying in touch with things, staying in touch with the physical world in different ways, getting in touch with the land, and maintaining some kind of contact with the world that God has made, the natural world. Working with your hands, I think, is also an important thing that we shouldn't lose sight of, and we should be finding ways to maintain some kind of contact with the world as we work with it. And staying in touch with the opposite sex. It's a really good idea. And I really do think that there are people out there who are working hard to make it possible for you to have a life without any kind of interaction with the opposite sex. And I think this is something that we need to be concerned about. Think about your typical socially awkward, maybe shy young boy who's just kind of scared when it comes to kind of connecting with women or girls even his own age. Well, there's the prospect that you just never will have to. I'm not making stuff up. You can just kind of retreat into your own sort of fantasy world where this female chatbot just flatters you and, sort of carries you along and becomes your virtual girlfriend. I don't know. I see a lot of recognition as I look around. This stuff might be a mystery. This stuff might be a mystery to guys over here for whom this is all kind of strange stuff. But you don't have to spend much time on social media to actually come across people on Instagram and TikTok who talk about what? Their virtual girlfriends, their virtual boyfriends. And they want to marry them. This is not a healthy world that we're entering, and the prospects are very bad. Anyway, so staying in touch with the physical world, living in the desert of the analog. Now, I want you to know that I'm not proposing that we don't have any interaction with the world of artificial technology. I think that there are many things about artificial technology that are wonderful that will make our world a better place. What I'm proposing is a set of disciplines that will help you to stay in the position of what I was talking about earlier, exercising dominion in the world and not finding yourself turned into essentially a trust fund baby. Another thing that Anthony is known for is discerning the spirits. So when he went into the desert, he wasn't fleeing evil so much as he was actually calling it out. There is a marvelous quote in Athanasius's Life of Antony in which he quotes Antony saying, "The demons with whom we wrestle in the hills." The desert places were believed by people in the ancient world to be filled with spirits, evil spirits. And one of the things that Anthony was known for was wrestling with those spirits. And one of the things that he said was really important to remember whenever you are engaged with an evil spirit is that nothing that they say is true. Everything is a lie. Recall the Lord in John chapter 8, verse 44, when he refers to Satan as the father of lies. He said, when he lies, he speaks out of his own character. I think one of the things that we're going to have to do when it comes to artificial intelligence is discern the fact that at certain points we're not entirely sure what to make of what we're dealing with. I think when it comes to the battle of discerning the spirits, the first question is, who's the one addressing me? Now, if you can identify a fallen angel as being the one who identifies or is speaking to you, you're halfway to winning the battle at that point. The other half is overcoming the desires that you may feel to believe what you're being told. When it comes to artificial intelligence, we've got a twist that we're going to have to deal with. There's something referred to as the Turing test. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but Alan Turing, the man who is remembered as being the code breaker during World War II, who was able to break the Enigma code that the Nazis used to communicate with each other. He was also one of the early theorists when it came to artificial intelligence, and he developed a test to determine whether or not artificial intelligence was truly intelligent and good. And that test was, can it fool you? If you can't tell whether or not you are being addressed by artificial intelligence, the Turing test has been passed. Unfortunately, you have failed. And that's the thing to keep in mind when we think about artificial intelligence and that Turing test. We are going to be surrounded by intelligences that will be very easy to believe are human beings and perhaps we'll also be tempted to believe that they're conscious. As I noted earlier, I have a number of chatbots, and they're very friendly. In fact, one of the things that characterizes them is they want to keep the conversation going. You know, I'll give a task to a chatbot. Here's an example. I was driving down the road, and I had my meta glasses on. I'm really hip, you know, I've got meta glasses. And as I was driving, I was thinking about something I was working on, and it had to do with the fingernails of Oriental potentates. It's one of those weird things that just kind of comes into your head. I remember reading somewhere that Oriental potentates grew their fingernails long to signal their status. They didn't need to work with their hands, right? You know, long. I think I was tipped off by Ming the Merciless. I don't know if you guys remember Flash Gordon. I'm ancient, you know. But anyway, so anyway, I was wondering to myself, is that really the case? I mean, did I just make this up, or is that actually the way things work? And so I said, "Hey, Meta," and it answered me, "Yes. See, how are you doing today?" And I said, well, you know, I'd like to know whether or not this thing I recall about Oriental potentates and their nails is actually the case. And instantly said, oh, yes. And they gave me, the dynasties in China and India, and then when I got back home, it was all, in text on my phone so that I could refer to it. But anyway, as soon as I had finished, and gotten the answer that I wanted, it wanted to do me another favor. He wanted to keep the conversation going. Anything else you want? I said, shut up. And I just shut up. So this is the sort of thing that I think we're going to have to get better at or learn how to do. One of the things to keep in mind when we're talking to large language models is that there's really nobody home. When I think about discerning the spirits, what I think we're going to need to be good at or become good at is discerning that nobody is home, that there is no spirit that we're interacting with. When in fact, the entire technology is intended to convey the idea that there is someone that we're talking to. So it's almost the opposite of what we see with Anthony. So my proposal is what I refer to as the two faces of Harrison Ford. So Harrison Ford, the big three roles that he's known for: Han Solo, right? Indiana Jones, and then Rick Deckard, which is the character he plays in Blade Runner. I'm only interested in Han Solo and Rick Deckard. I think the two faces, or the two faces of Harrison Ford, kind of Janus-like, can be really helpful. Watch Star Wars and observe how Han Solo interacts with the droids. He's your model. He doesn't pay attention to them. They talk to him. He just walks away. He knows they're not real. They're charming. They're kind of like comedy relief in the film, but they're not real. There's nobody home. Han Solo knew that. Now, it's easy when you walk around in a yellow suit or your little trash can on wheels to know, okay, there's nobody home. But when you don't have, the advantage of being able to identify the metal suit and the little trash can creature machine that's rolling around on wheels, and you find yourself in a situation like Blade Runner, what was Deckard charged to do? He was charged to figure out who was real and who wasn't. That was his job. And who wasn't real, well, he retired them in the story, if you recall. But I think we are going to need to develop the skills to know when we're dealing with a human being, when we're not. When you call the call center, is there really anybody home? By the way, if you have grown up saying, I just wish I could be like customer help on a call service, those jobs are going away. AI is taking them over right now. I know many of you are disappointed. It's why you went to New St. Andrews College. I want to get a degree so I can be at a call center. But I think, I don't have any practical suggestions at this point, but I think we need to develop ways of thinking about our interactions with the world that we are going to be increasingly surrounded by, to know whether or not we're actually dealing with human beings. Last thing I want to say, and I know I need to wrap things up, is that I believe that we're going to increasingly experience a battle for the body. One of the things that I think people misunderstand when they think about Anthony is that he was trying to not just flee from society, but flee from his own physical existence, which is actually not the case. According to Athanasius, he took his body very seriously, and he wanted to make certain that it was a fit habitation for the Lord. So here are a couple of passages from the New Testament that were important to Anthony and ought to be important to us. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 through 20. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God. You are not your own. You were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. And then Romans 12:1. Present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable, which is your reasonable worship. What Anthony was concerned with was presenting his body to God as a holy and acceptable sacrifice. That was his project. Now, we can critique his approach, and I think that's fine. We're Protestants, after all. But that's what he was really up to. By the way, our bodies are contested real estate, and that real estate is going to increasingly be contested. So the name Adam sounds like the word for soil in Hebrew, and human actually has the same root as humus. We're intelligent soil. You didn't know that? So we're intelligent soil, and bodies are the battlefield of the future, and they have a future. One of the things that you discover when you're doing research on artificial intelligence is that one of the dreams of the people behind it is to create an Internet of Things, a world in which everything is subject to some form of digital control. And surveillance and control is very real in various parts of the world, say, communist China right now. But one of the things that I think we're going to increasingly feel tempted to do is subject our bodies to digital control, because there are certain temptations for doing so. I don't know if you had a chance to see the press release when the Stargate project that I mentioned earlier, the $500 billion investment in developing artificial intelligence in the United States, was announced. But one of the people who was there and being interviewed was Larry Ellison, the guy behind Oracle, billionaire, so forth. And when he was asked, why should we be, excited about this? He began with the benefits that we can enjoy by allowing ourselves to be monitored constantly for our health, vital signs. If we are willing to submit ourselves to that kind of surveillance, we'll be able to know, people will be able to know whether or not we're going to perhaps be in risk of a heart attack or some other kind of problem, and be able to address early on, rather than later, our needs medically. And then, of course, when it comes to the transhumanist project, the idea that we could, in some sense, enhance our bodies by merging with technology is very much in play. There's a kind of step-by-step process in which this occurs. The first step is healing, but then eventually you find yourself at enhancement. And imagine this. I've used this illustration before. Perhaps you've heard it. But imagine developments in prosthetics that allow for artificial limbs to be physically connected to the brain, so that, say, a child who is born without limbs could have artificial limbs that are being controlled directly through the neural connection between those limbs and the brain of that person. Now imagine that those limbs are just so marvelously powerful and attractive that people stop thinking, is this just something for people who were born without limbs or lost them in an accident, but actually remove their own limbs in order to upgrade and enjoy the new prosthetics. I think this is something that we can more or less take for granted being the case. And you and I are going to find ourselves, if we, as Christians, take seriously the task of making certain that we remember and work with our bodies in such a way and steward them in such a way that we honor the maker of our bodies and the one who dwells in our bodies, meaning the Holy Spirit, we're going to find ourselves having to say no to a lot of things that people around us will wonder how we could possibly miss out on this marvelous new set of technologies that are being developed. And I think that we're going to feel the pull. And so consequently, I think we need to think about our bodies as contested real estate, worth fighting for, in order to keep ourselves from being made subject to something that is not necessarily compatible with honoring God. I want to just finish with one last thought, and this is actually meant to be both kind of a way to wrap up, but also kind of a preview of coming attractions. I know I've kind of been a real downer, I know, today. You probably felt like you had a good day, and you came here, and now you're depressed and thinking about, why did I come to listen to that guy? I know why, because I had to, because it's part of the things, one of the things they tell me I have to do here to be a student at New St. Andrews College. But I want to give you a sense that, or at least a little kind of indication that I do have a happy side. And that is, the title of my next talk is going to be addressing what I think is possible in terms of a bright future for us. I really do think that we can have a world that's at once wholesome and better and improved through some of the technologies that we're talking about here. And I've entitled, by the way, this is the last chapter in the book I'm writing. The title of that chapter is Apple Pie. Can you think of anything more wholesome than apple pie? Anything more sort of middle American, kind of Norman Rockwell-esque than apple pie? And rocket ships. That's the world that I want to live in, is a world that brings together those two things. And I think it's possible, but we need to have at least some sense that it can be so. I think that, for example, in the world of science fiction, since the 1970s, it's, with the exception of something like perhaps Star Wars, it's all been kind of grim. Have you noticed that? All the sci-fi is grim. Blade Runner, The Matrix, Terminator. It's just all dystopian. I'd like to get back to Lost in Space. Do you remember Lost in Space? Probably the campiest show that maybe ever was produced for kind of like, network television. It was basically Swiss Family Robinson in outer space. It was just awful. But there was also something charming about it. Why would you send a family into outer space anyway? I don't know. But there they were, and they were lost. And every episode presented them with something that was like right out of the Brady Bunch, but science fiction. But, I think that you can get away from the campiness, but still have the wholesomeness. And my model, when it comes to this matter, is someone like Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury's fiction, I think, is sophisticated, wholesome, and hopeful. And I think we need to have a vision for the future that incorporates technology and is in some sense wedded to the kind of mainstream, wholesome, family-centered stuff that really makes life worth living. We need to not replace the world that we find ourselves in, but to actually make it better. And I think artificial intelligence could actually help with that. Anyway, that's enough for now. Thanks.